How about a trip back to the good old days? Who remembers your best treehouse memory? As I try to share that with my kids in our home, the idea was a new treehouse. And I want to walk you through how we got there today. If you've hung around us for very long or seen anything else on the channel, we're backyard people. We love a big backyard at home. And so I am constantly trying to figure out what else can we do in and with our backyard for the adults, the kids, friends, guests, all that jazz. But a treehouse is an absolute must if you have kids and maybe even if you don't. Let me show you our treehouse. Now, we had one before and I built it, and it's probably what you would expect. It was sort of an A-frame lean-to. It was a blast. The kids loved it, but I knew we could do better. So when we were building our house, and you might get a look at the house, but when we were building our house, I simply asked the builder, hey, if you have any leftover material of any decent size that would be usable, just stash all that in the garage for me. I'm gonna do something with it later. And I didn't yet know what I would do with it, but as it started to pile up, and there was a pretty decent amount of it, most of it in the garage, some of it in pallets out in the front yard. And actually we had tore down our old house, so I kept some big cedar beams and a few things from the old house as well. So we had a couple of different places with some usable leftover material. So I started thinking, man, what could I build with that? And it got to a point where there was enough of it that I started thinking this might be a pretty incredible, pretty epic treehouse for the kids in the backyard. Then I started getting real dreamy about maybe putting it back by the pond. And so you're about to see what we ended up with. And then I want to tell you how we ended up with it. At the very back of our lot, and if you've seen our other videos, I call this Zone 5. So if you haven't seen our zones video, check that out. It might be around here someplace. You can find it on the channel, where I think through backyards and how to design your incredible backyard life in sort of a zone thing. So this is the back one where you can do whatever you want because it's not up by the house where people see it a lot, and you can go back and play and not bother everybody up there. My kids get the privilege of having a pretty darn big treehouse in a pretty darn big backyard, far away from the house, but by the pond, where they can play and scream and jump in the pond and paddle and throw stuff and fish and all that good stuff. Let me get you a better angle over here. What we actually call the pond house. Now, for all intents and purposes, it is a tree house, but it is obviously not in a tree. So in Texas in the summer is actually when we use it the least because it gets hot in there. But all the rest of the year, this thing gets used a ton. It gets used a little bit now. I'll show you a few elements of it in a second, but the way we got here, as I started seeing that material pile up in the garage and in the yard and on the concrete slab, I started thinking we could build something pretty big. So I made an inventory list, just how many 2x4s, how many 2x6s, how much plywood, how many old cedar beams do we have? And I made a list, and then I dropped it in Chat GPT for a little artificial intelligence help. And I just said to Chat GPT, what is the largest structure we could create with the following materials? And then I told it, but it needs to be at least 6 feet off the ground, useful and safe and fun for the kids, watertight, as airtight as possible, and within this distance of the pond and all that kind of stuff. Boom, immediately it spit out a full-on build plan, which otherwise would have cost a bunch of money. So then I started playing games with it and going, okay, well, could it be a little bit longer? Could the ceiling be a little bit taller? Could there be a slide coming off of it? How tall would the stairs be? If I was willing to spend a little bit more money on materials, what else could we do? What other functions could we get? Could it fit a 6-foot hammock? All sorts of things. And GPT and I are working back and forth to come up with a plan that ultimately I was pretty happy with. It ended up being like, I don't know, 20-something pages of back and forth with Chat GPT of telling it that I had 2 4x12x12 cedar planks and all that kind of stuff. I had a plan that looked pretty great. So I took this plan and I handed it to the framer that was finishing up the framing portion of the house. And I just said, hey, could you build this for me? And he looked at it and he's like, yeah, this is super descriptive. I could totally do that. And I said, how long would it take? He said, no more than 2 days. So I was like, great. How much? His price was very reasonable. I don't think I could have even bought the basic materials for a smaller treehouse for the same amount. We used materials that we could not return, so I was already stuck with them anyway. And we ended up with this big bad boy, which has a lot of cool, fun features, but is still really a pretty basic treehouse. It's a giant box with a full-size walk-through door. We do have some vents up in the gables, so there is a little bit of airflow, so it's not really ever super, super miserably hot. But it is a blast in the fall and the winter. The kids can camp out here, have friends. The girls bring their easels and paint. The boys play board games and cards, and they have a lot of fun. So we had a couple of windows left over from the house. I never, ever, if I'm building a treehouse, would ever put a window in. We had a couple of windows left over from the house that we decided not to use, that couldn't be returned or repurposed really any other great use. So those ended up going in here. At the last minute, he asked me if I wanted to put, he had to put a cross beam in, but he asked if I wanted to double it up in case we wanted to build a loft later. So many super cool little simple things happen just because we didn't waste material. So if you're like me and you like big backyards and you like entertaining, or you've got a family that wants to enjoy it, you're probably not throwing a lot out either. You know, if you've got extra wood, that could be a deck, that could be a platform, that could be a bridge over a little creek or something, but you're going to use that in your yard. If you got extra bricks or pavers, you can use that. We put most of that here. So we're just repurposing materials. We're not being wasteful. And then again, from the house, we had the windows, and we're thinking about future functionality. So, you know, this could convert and do a lot of things. It could be basic storage if the kids are gone and we're not using it. Underneath it is mostly waterproof storage. So we're thinking about putting some bricks or stones down there, putting some hammocks and a couple of chairs. We love to use the pond and fish and play. Sometimes the kids will get out the paddle boat or the remote controls. A loft here would be super fun just to create some other functionality. In theory, we could put a window unit in here eventually because we have some power out to the dock on the pond there. So there's just so much future potential. But if we never did another single thing, our kids love it, especially my girls. Like I said, they call it the pond house because they've got pond views and they're back by the pond. They're so far away from the house that we can see that they're back here. We can use the walkie-talkies to communicate with them while they're back here. Another great big backyard trick, by the way, is you got to have some walkie-talkies. If you don't have the backyard treehouse figured out, that might help you get there more quickly, more efficiently, more affordably. If you got some leftover lumber, or you have some friends, or you see a construction site that's throwing some things away and they give you permission, gather that stuff. You might end up having a great treehouse or a shed or a dock or some other awesome backyard feature, and you might not need the architect or the designer or to buy some plans because Chat GPT will hook you up for free, or for like 20 bucks a month, it will hook you up even better. So that's what we did. We ended up with a big backyard with a big backyard treehouse, which our kids call the pond house, all for minimal cost and minimal time with some pretty significant creativity and quality. So we love it. Hopefully you'll have one and love it too. Check out the rest of the videos on our channel for other amazing ways to live in and love your backyard. I'll see you on the next one.